Good morning. My name is Jason Tempestini. I am the managing director here at Rods & Cones and the designated victim for showing you pre-flight profiles in PitStop Pro. This is the third stop in our PitStop Pro Deep Dive series. Every time we make one of these, Jeff and I sit down and we script these things out. And I swear every time we make one of these, we think of the next one we're going to make or the next few we're going to make. So spoiler alert, the next one next month is going to be about smart pre-flight as we start to get heavy variables involved in pre-flight. But today we're just going to talk about basic pre-flight and what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And I just wanted to start basically by talking about pre-flight and what we're trying to accomplish. There is I suppose I should say, hey, so my name is Jason. For those of you who don't know, I'm with Rods & Cones. We're a workflow automation and color management consultancy out of Oakland, California. We've been going since 1996. We started out predominantly as a color consultancy and moved into automation quite a few years ago now. Myself, I started out in this industry back in 1990. Yeah, that's a real year. It happened before the turn of the century. I know it seems crazy. I ran a mid-sized print shop in Northern California from 1997 until about 4 years ago. We had couple hundred people. We did everything under the sun. As it turns out, the owner of my shop wasn't really into printing. He just had a hobby of buying printing companies, and my job was being able to integrate them all under one roof and into one system. So I became very dependent upon automation. But before I came to this shop in 97, I worked for a little tiny company in Southern California called Marksware Software, and they developed a product called Flight Check. And this is the first popular commercially available pre-flighting software that was available for native applications, and it was quite a revolution. And that's what really got me started on the whole concept of pre-flight back in the day. And like every other vendor that came up shortly after that, Marksware is very proud of the 1,600 things they checked in files. And when we're talking about native files, there's a little more need to check things in depth, but still, 1,600 checks is radically overblown. And one of the things that you've heard me talk about before, if you've been on either one of the other two deep dive webinars, is that we just end up checking and repairing the things that are going to allow us to actually interact with the file. Not interact with the file, I'm sorry, to get the job printed. Let's put ink on paper and sell it for a profit. Right? This is what we do, or toner on paper, if that's your particular bent. But that's all we're going to do with these files. So even here, where my pre-flight profile has definitely gotten larger and more complicated than it's ever been before, we're still checking what I feel is the bare minimum of items to be able to produce a PDF that we can print and sell for money. So when we talk about pre-flight and how we're going to get into pre-flight and what we're pre-flighting, right? What we're talking about today is the beginning of the road in a pre-flight setup and a pre-flight journey as I see it, right? As we see it here at Rods & Cones, which means we're running a pre-flight profile today, which we would run on every single job. And pre-flight profiles, as you see them from InFocus PitStop Pro, when we start looking at pre-flight profiles, it's not just pre-flight. There's a lot of things that can be checked and fixed by going through a process like this. And we're checking and fixing quite a few things. And as per normal, we have an opinion about how we're looking at these things. But I want to note that there can often be a two-stage filtration that happens in pre-flight. Many of the customers that we talk to, they want to set up simple pre-flight filters that their customer service reps or sales reps can use to get an initial filter on what's going on. And importantly, those pre-flight filters, they don't want to fix anything. They just want their CSRs or sales reps to be able to see, hey, here's what's happening, here's what's going on, so that they can make a qualified view on whether the job's going to be acceptable or not. And then we get into deeper checks that start to fix some things, and in some cases might have opinions about how things move along. Now, this one, what we're working on here today, you'll see is cut sheet CMYK V1. So 3 pieces of data that's in this name, and I know I add data into these names. That naming is important to me, as many of you know. So for example, this is the AlphaGraphics standard just errors pre-flight profile. I imagine you can guess what it's doing is just picking up errors, and it doesn't fix anything, right? But what we're doing here for cut sheet CMYK V1 is that this is a cut sheet profile. To utilize something like this is for cut sheet work. This is for, small format digital, not wide format digital, not grand format digital. It's not for litho. A lot of this has to do with how we assess resolution and the kinds of things we're worried about with resolution. But also a lot of it has to do with how we are, the decisions we're making about how we move forward and what sorts of things we check on. Secondly, CMYK. Now, look, there's a lot of conversation that could be had about whether we should force things to CMYK or leave them RGB or leave them alone exactly as we find them. These are valuable discussions, some of which we've had along the way. But I want you to know that for this pre-flight profile, this is a CMYK pre-flight profile. We are pushing everything to CMYK. And you'll see it as we go along. So the basic idea here is you have a job that's come up, you pick the pre-flight profile that you want to run, and believe me, there are many pre-flight profiles. The standard set is giant, so giant in fact that they broke it down by grouping. And for instance, the Ghent PDF work group, whose standards I believe are unparalleled in PDF processing. The 2022 specifications, the most recent published just for PDF X4, boy, it just goes on and on and on and on. So there are many standards you can use. This one's ours. We like it. So let's run it. Have your file open, grab your pre-flight profile, click run. It's going to run the pre-flight profile, and it's going to give you a result. Okay? Objects have been found to be close to the edge. RGB color is used. Transparent objects have been found and set to overprint. And then it's got a couple of information boxes down here. The trim box is 8.26772 inches, and it should be 0. That's odd. The trim box height is 10.82678, and it should be 0. It's 4 times on pages 1 through 4. So we have the same page box on all the pages. I'm not sure it should be 0, but I want to point something out. This little blue icon. So this is just informational. And we actually put a check inside this pre-flight profile to surface information that you might want to know about the file. And in this case, there's 2 big ones that jump out. One, the trim box is this size. So now you know the trim size of the document. And the document uses 4 separations. They're just CMYK, or black, cyan, magenta, yellow, because we're particular about this. But these are just pieces of information. Pre-flight profiles don't just reveal errors. They also give you information back. And there's 2 pieces of information that we have. And as we get into how this piece is done, down here you can see that there are some details. Objects found on these pages and 65 times on pages 1 through 4. And sometimes there's a solution, and the solution in this case is, hey, you can move things in from the outside edges, right? Both of these pieces are presented. So now let's go ahead and take a look at a pre-flight profile. Now, I'm running the resolution of my screen very small, or very low, just so that everything is reasonably readable, right? But you might just be able to see there's like a little blue tick right down here, and that's actually the OK box. The dialog is actually just slightly larger than the minimum screen resolution I have it set at. We might see that bouncing around a little bit. Enough of the restrictions. I want to talk about some basic pieces about how we set a pre-flight profile up. Starting, the categories of checks are down here on the left-hand side, and then the detail about any particular check is here on the right. And this isn't really a check, but it does give you some information about what this pre-flight profile is about. So a name, who created it, who the company was associated with it, any description you want to put in, and then some other information about it. For instance, this profile is not locked. This is the profile we're going to send you at the end of the webinar, along with a link to this video. So if I am talking too fast, you can slow it down. Or if I start talking too slowly, you can run it at 1.5x like all of us do. And it's not locked. So the idea is that you can use it and you can edit it to your heart's content. Problem handling also allows us to allow fixes. And what this is allowing us to do is to along the line, let the PDF profile fix things as we go. And we've got some information about the pre-flight report. It's not as important, the information about the pre-flight report here, and I'll show you why. But you can turn on or off the information that you get. We'll talk about the report in a little bit. The second piece I want to show you is color management. So color management is just a basic color management setup, and sometimes I have it disabled. If we're doing a pre-flight profile that does not affect color, I turn off color management. We don't need to use it. In this case, we're pushing everything to CMYK, which we'll show a little bit later. And here we've enabled color management. Again, with color management, like in many places, we're not going to get into this a whole bunch here, but there's a set of source profiles. This is the source profile that is set if the client has provided files that have no input profile. So this is the assumed profiles if there's no assigned profile for the input. And then the target, we're going to set a target profile of what we're looking for, including Adobe RGB, the CGET's CRPC6 CMYK profile, and the rendering intent, which in our case is relative colorimetric. There's a whole bunch of information buried in this. You can go to a 2-day, 16-hour class just about the contents of this particular dialogue. Not one that I give, but Printing United has a couple of fantastic ones, and or the Print Alliance. It's hard to keep track of what they're calling themselves these days, I have to be honest. But there is one important piece that I want to point out here, and that is the output intent overrides the selected ICC profiles. What this means is that if they profile it themselves, we're going to accept the profiles they use. And again, the checkbox down here, output intent overrides the selected ICC profiles, which means again that if they have set an output intent on the PDF, if they've gone to the extent of building a PDF with its own profile and output intent, we're going to go ahead and maintain that output intent. You can tell these are decisions. It's debatable whether we want to allow people to set their own profiles or we're just going to say everybody's an idiot and they don't know what they're doing. Client groups vary, right? And it's debatable whether we want to make that same decision about the output intent, right? Are we going to allow files from folks that set an output intent, or are we just going to override their decisions and say, hey, we're going to force it to what we did here? In this case, in both sides, we're assuming good faith and some skill, right? We're assuming if you brought in files that have an ICC profile, we're going to use them. And if you set up this PDF so that it had an output intent, we're going to maintain that output intent because that's what you had in mind. Finally, restrictions. Oh boy, the restrictions go on and on and on. It is too deep of a topic for this area. Let it simply be said that if you need to make a pre-flight profile and you need to publish it to a mass audience, say the entire world of printing, and you want to set up some restrictions about how these things can be used, how you can import, edit, export the processes that you're using, there's a whole elaborate restriction section in here. I'll be completely honest with you, I've never had a reason to use it. And speaking of something I've never had a reason to use, let's talk about PDF standards briefly. So I will say briefly that in this pre-flight check, in this pre-flight profile, and in every pre-flight profile that I've ever used in production, there is no PDF standard check enabled. And as you can see here, the category isn't even enabled. So it tells you a little bit about how you get into these things, right? We go back up to general. You can see that some of these are gray, darker gray, and some of them are a lighter gray. The lighter gray are activated and the darker grays are not activated. So these categories aren't enabled. So I can enable the category and not even have any checks in here. And it still shows as unenabled, even though the category is enabled. To check something, I would put in PDF compliance, and now you can see it's gone to the lighter gray and we're actually checking something. All that said, little mechanics aside, what's the deal with PDF standards? So the Ghent work group, working out of Ghent in Europe, has developed and continues to develop and promote a series of PDF standards, some of which have been adopted as ISO standards as well. For the most part, we have seen these standards used almost exclusively in publication work. If you're submitting ads to the USA Today publication, they may want those to be of a certain PDF standard in an ideal way. And they may even accept things that aren't of a certain PDF standard, because when Nike sends you an ad, you just accept what they sent you and enjoy their money, and you don't quibble about whether the file was of a certain standard. However, PDF standards and the use of PDF standards can be a tremendous boon to everything from publications to your average corner copy shop. If you are checking for things that are complying with a PDF standard, if we're complying with X4A, for instance, there's a whole bunch of questions you don't need to ask. X4A, if it's compliant, means that all sorts of problems have already been solved. That is my last brief bit about that here. In this case, we're not checking against standards. And in the future, spoiler alert, there'll be one of these webinars on PDF standards exclusively if any of you are looking to get real bored or to find out the power that you can get at just by accepting standards into PDF grouping. All right. All that said, where standards was, I was going to be done with standards by the time we were 8 minutes after the hour. I'm only 12 minutes behind now. We're doing great. I think some of these things are going to go a little faster. Down the left, we're checking on elements in categories. Document, page, color, rendering, which you can see we're not getting at. Transparency, fonts, text, line art, images, layers, and some action lists that are on the bottom. So without further ado, let's get into what are we checking on? So in the document, we're mostly worried about damage. All of us have run into this. I certainly have. It is possible to get a PDF file that you can view just fine, but cannot print. And it cannot be printed either because it's damaged, or high resolution printing is actually not allowed, which means the file won't even rip, or printing at all is not allowed. In all of these cases, we indicate this problem is an error. And an error in a Preflight profile means we're done. If you've hit an error, there is no fix available, and we're stopping production there. In most automated systems, that's how we set this up. Remember, many times what we're doing is we're taking a Preflight profile like this, and we're integrating it into a switch automation workflow. So as a result, when we have red X's, that means we're diverting that file. We're going to email back whoever submitted it and say, hey, your file is broken and cannot proceed, and here's why. And frankly, if you can't rip the job, that's pretty well done. Under the page, there's a few different pieces that are set up here. We're going to go through and you can see there's a number of checks. And you can tell as we go through, like there's 3 checks here and they have 3 different types. And you can remove or you can edit the checks, right? In page, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different checks, unless I misnumbered that. We're going to go through what are the kinds of things we're checking for when we're looking at page layout. So the other piece that I want to point out is problems to detect and their type and whether we fix automatically. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we fix and what we don't. There's a level of things that we want to fix. If it's fixable and can be fixed, I have a tendency to lean on, let's go ahead and fix this. Let's make sure that when we get out the other side, it's fine. I don't want to do things that are necessarily going to alter the client's artwork, but I do want to make it printable. Again, with this lean towards, let's put ink on paper and sell it for a profit, right? Let's get this done. So the first thing is the page box layout, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. We can actually go back and forth here a little bit. I'm going to not save that document. And we'll take a look at this file. And if I run Preflight on this, got objects close to the edge, but importantly, sorry, it's not showing me. I'm going to, can you see here? We have a media box and a crop box in this file, but no trim, bleed, or art box. Here we're using the in-focus inspector. Again, I'm not going to go real deep into this, but this is just a piece that allows you some tools where you can look at files. If a file doesn't have a trim box, all sorts of things are problematic in a production workflow. It just needs to have it. So when we start going in and looking at, for instance, no trim box means essentially you cannot generate bleed. Many rips won't be able to identify what size it is. You might not be able to impose it, all sorts of problems. So when we're here and we're looking at page and we're saying, hey, if the page box layout doesn't correspond to press layout, which means we have a trim and a bleed and a media box. Those are the requirements, right? Then make them. So it's going to go ahead and create the trim, the crop, the media, the bleed, and the art box automatically. There is no harm to the customer's file by creating these boxes, but we need to have them for a lot of other things. Page scaling factor. In a lot of production work, there is a page scaling factor that's applied. Not even a lot of production work, but in some production work, a page scaling factor is applied, which means you might get something that comes in at quarter size. So the file itself is only 25% of the original size, but a page scaling factor of 4 is set. That file is going to look like it's the right size on screen. If you print it out to a laser printer, it's going to look like the right size. If you rip it one up, it's going to look like the right size. But then if you try to nest or impose it, it's going to be 25% of the size because page scaling factor isn't adhered to across the board in all the tools everywhere. So in every case where we find a page scaling factor, we apply it. We make it the right size. If objects don't have enough bleed, we're going to warn you about this, but we're not going to fix it. If different page sizes are found, we're going to mark it as an error. This cut sheet, right? If you have 3 different page sizes in a document, probably there's a problem. That's an error. Same thing with orientation. If half the pages are portrait, but one's landscape, we're going to mark that as an error. If a page is empty, we're going to give you a warning about this. Hey, we might not need to remove it. Hey, blank inside front page happens all the time. But we do want to warn you, like, are you sure you wanted a blank page? And then finally, that informational thing we talked about. If the page box is not 0 by 0, then give us a warning or give us some information. And this is just a way to poke the Preflight profile into providing you with that trim size information. I'm not seeing a bunch of questions coming in. We're continuing on here to color. Here's where we start getting exciting. All right. So the first two. So in colors where we're starting to make decisions, right? And these are decisions that are affecting clients' artwork, but maybe the decision we want to make anyhow. So in the shop that I ran for 25 plus years, we pushed everything to CMYK. Again, these days, I'm not sure it's the right decision for cut sheet digital, but that's what we did. And it was a little arduous because I wasn't as familiar with Preflight profiles then as I am now. It got better as we got later into my work there, but using these tools can make it really easy. So the first 2 steps, RGB gray or impure CMYK gray is used, and then RGB black or impure CMYK black is used. I set these in every Preflight profile and give real gray and real black. Essentially what this breaks through is what I believe is a common error, different kinds of black in a file. You never want different kinds of black to appear in a file. You can't see it on screen. You only see it in print, and you get a job rejection that way. Nobody is looking for some sort of special black on their particular piece, or very few folks are. So those 2 checks I run every time, and I always do the automatic fix. Now we're going to get into the maybe yes, maybe no, which is I'm saying if any RGB is used, you convert it to CMYK. If any calibrated RGB is used, convert it to CMYK. If any lab color is used, convert it to CMYK. If any calibrated gray is used, convert it to CMYK. This is the CMYK profile. This is why it becomes a CMYK profile. It's all right here, right? And then, hey, another one of these little information boxes. If more than 0 separations are used, tell me about them. So what that's going to do is that's how I find out, oh, we're using cyan, magenta, yellow, and black on this file, right? Just a set of checks on color. Rendering. Transfer functions in UCR, well beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. These are things that we can do. We can apply UCR and custom transfer functions to files beyond what we're doing with the general Preflight profile. Transparency, on the other hand, 2 splits. One, a graphic element that uses a spot color and is transparent is an error. All right, maybe debatable, maybe. Sometimes you can get away with this, but essentially, if you have a transparent spot color in a file, it's going to reproduce in an unpredictable way based on all of our experience to date, right? So if that's the case, you have a transparent spot being used, we mark it as an error. It doesn't mean that you can't then, it comes back to you and you're like, no, these people really know what they're doing. And you can run it back through another Preflight profile that has that turned off. But for standard work, that's what we're looking at. If a graphic element is set to overprint and transparent, we mark it as a warning. Hey, you may want to know there's transparency here. By and large, the RIPs are handling transparency well now. That may not be the case in your RIP. Maybe you're working on a Roland or some oddball little device that has trouble with transparency. We're giving you a warning. You know if there's transparency in the file. And most importantly, if a page has transparent graphic elements and there's no blending color space defined, here's the deal. The blending space tells the RIP how to make this conversion. If there is no blending space, you will have a mess. So we auto set this blending space to CMYK because this is CMYK. This is the area where it gets real debatable whether you want to be running CMYK or RGB, because the RGB color space is so much larger and contains a much, much larger amount of shades and tints. Having an RGB blending space can potentially give you better results, but we can't be in a CMYK profile, Preflight profile, without using the CMYK blending space. And then again, we're just checking if this graphic element is transparent. It's the same as overprint and transparent. It's just another check for transparency. And we're not fixing any of that stuff automatically. And look at that. I'm all the way up to fonts, and I'm now only 4 minutes behind. We're making headway here. Let's talk about fonts. And I really want to show you something important about fonts. I made a special file just for this. Look at this. It's another version of Food Intrepid, but now it's got a second page here, right? And I mean, I realize that the screen is showing type very small, but this is kind of intentional because this file has an error you're just not going to find in production. But if I run my Preflight profile, you can see there's an X right here. Font Myriad Regular Pro is missing needed characters one time on page 2. What in the world are we talking about there? So let's highlight it. It's not on page 1, it's on page 2. And you can see if we zoom way in, now everybody can see I have a broken character there. So if the fonts are not completely embedded, and most of the standards do a subset embed of the fonts, which means that it searches the whole document, finds every individual character that's used, and it only embeds those individual characters. You can make font embedding microscopically smaller. It is technically efficient, and it has a lot to do with font licensing as well. If you have that case and then somebody edits this PDF, you're going to end up with this sort of character. So I tried to put an asterisk in this line, and the asterisk wasn't embedded, so it gave me this character issue, right? And it's showing right now because I told it to highlight. I'm going to turn off the highlight here and close my navigator just so I can go here. And you can see just how hard that would be to catch. In my experience, these font breaks don't happen on headlines where you can see them just fine. They only happen on the 6-point legal type on the back panel. And the only thing they really affect is the fact that the client won't pay for the job because there's a problem with the font that nobody will ever see, but it matters to somebody. So that error, that one error, font contains missing glyphs or metrics. That is this error. And it's such a critical one and so important to break down. Also, hey, if the font's not embedded, it's going to try to completely embed the font. It is going to try to completely embed the font. That is, if the font is loaded, if you have the same version, it's actually quite accurate, but you can potentially make the PDF that you're dealing with more editable. So I have to say, you have to have a lot of fonts loaded, blah, 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 blah. But if you're working with a standard client, you always have that client's fonts loaded and they always use the same ones and they're totally responsible about it and they never make mistakes in working with fonts, or there's rainbows are real, but there's unicorns, then, hey, this can really help you. In some cases, we do have that circumstance. Text. Hey, this is sort of a little piece. Text is invisible. It has neither fill nor stroke color. I want to remove the invisible text. Little text chunks get left all over the place and cause problems, okay? We have white text that does not knock out. I'm going to warn you about it because I want you to go search out what the problem is. You can just knock out white text. I've literally had white text set partially to overprint and it displays fine but doesn't print right. Either of these problems, I want to check for them. What we are not doing is looking at text size. When you get into wide format, it's important to note we can do things like check for text that is smaller than X size and give you a warning if you have limits on your wide format device and how small of a text you can resolve. Line art is kind of the same thing. Again, we're looking for line art, white line art that doesn't knock out or is invisible, these sorts of things. We can also look at this line weight. In this case, we could actually make a change to it where if a line is too thin to properly resolve on your wide format device, you can buff up that line. There's another piece too, looking at nodes. It's important to note sometimes, for those of you who run into this with clipping paths or with cut outlines, where it looks like they didn't draw a cut outline, they stippled it, and there's a billion little segments on that path in your wide format, and you can listen to the cutter going, and also stipple the item out of the foam core board instead of just smoothly cutting it. This is a way to give yourself a little warning that that sort of thing might exist. Images. Yeah, this is one of the things that we really just need to check for. Image resolution is probably the most important piece. It's the thing we all need to know and check for. And in many cases, what we want to fix. So let's talk about that. So standard, if an image is below 150 PPI, I want to warn it. Warn it? Why aren't you just fixing it? Well, why aren't you just saying, why aren't we rejecting it? Because 150 PPI might be fine. Maybe it's not stereo equipment. Maybe this client always sends in low resolution art and they never fix the files. You're just going to have to cope with it. I just want to give you a warning. However, if an image comes in that's higher than 200 DPI, make it 200 DPI using bicubic resampling, right? Because I don't need images that are too large. And 200, I think, is the line for cut sheet digital. Now, your mileage may vary, right? Maybe you do a lot of stereo equipment or medical devices or whatever, and you need super high resolution so that knurling on tools or grading on the front of computers doesn't look bad. But for most of us, 200 PPI is perfect. And finally, if the resolution of any color or grayscale image is below 50 dpi, she's an error, right? I don't care what your circumstance is, probably you can't do below 50 ppi. Now, here's something that I do know. We often link these up with upscaling action lists. Why would we do that? Well, as my buddy Jeff pointed out, he's never had a client that didn't pay for a job. He's had plenty of clients that didn't pay for jobs because the artwork was pixelated, but he's never had a client not pay for the job because the artwork was soft. So the image was soft, right? So in many cases, even without using some sort of online AI image resolution enhancing thing, you can just res up the image and get a soft image, maybe not a perfect resolution image, but something that's going to sell out of the bucket of garbage that you're provided with. These warnings and errors will give you the opportunity to do that. Layers. If the print state is not print when visible, that's an error. When you get into layers, it's entirely possible to have a layer be invisible and still printing. Ask me how I know this. Ask me how many days it took me to figure out the first time that I had an invisible layer that was able to print, why weird things were showing up in the rip, how many people I had to ask. It was a long week and an angry client. So this just checks, right? It says, hey, the print state is not set to print when visible for a layer. I'm not fixing it automatically, but that's debatable. I went through such a particular piece of pain that I normally set this to make it print when visible because, hey, if you gave me a layer that's visible, I'm printing it. You should have deleted it if you didn't want it printed. But I can see where potentially I'm being slightly aggressive there. So that's where we end up like, okay, all right, we're going to check for when it's prints with visible. Otherwise, we're not worried about it. One last thing I want to talk about here is action lists. So at the end of the line, we can apply action list to any Preflight profile, and you can bring in any action list you like. So this is the looks black and convert to black action list. We've talked about this in a couple of the other sessions, but it's going to go through and select everything that looks even like it's vaguely black and white, and we're going to convert it to grayscale. And we're going to maintain our color management settings, but we're going to set special color management settings just for converting things to grayscale. And the other thing we're doing here, for instance, change word hyperlinks to grayscale so that the blue hyperlink doesn't show up. A lot of people like doing this. I actually like doing this. Print hidden layers. It's going to say, if anything always prints, it's going to change it to visible and change that layer configuration to present. Hey, maybe that's the thing I was talking about earlier. It's like, if you said it's supposed to print, I'm going to make it visible so that you can see it. These action lists come from your own set of action lists, and you can bring them in. You can import them from your action list. But it's very important to remember something here. I can double click on this and I can edit this action list. It is not changing the looks black and convert to black action list that this came from. You are importing action lists into here. And when you get them imported, you now work with them inside this environment. You're not updating both sides. So, proper procedure would say that you only edit your primary action lists, and then you delete and re-import them as you want to. You can get into very extensive use of Preflight profile or of action lists inside of Preflight profiles and do interesting things about turning them on and off. And you can handle those things variably so that based on information that you can get into, you can determine whether you're going to use action lists or not. A little hint as we get next week into Smart Preflight, or next week, you wish. Next month, I can't do them that fast. Next month into Smart Preflight, and we start talking about Preflight profiles that are driven by variable sets that you use. So when we get all the way done with this list, what we have is this cut sheet CMYK V1. It forces things to CMYK. You can see pretty easily how you wouldn't have to do that. Why we've made the decisions we've made and what's important about Preflight and how to get these things going. So now, it takes a little bit to edit this video down. Daniel, I see your question. I'll answer it in just a second. So this video get edited down, and sometime in about the next week, we will send you this cut sheet CMYK V1 and a link to the video that you can see if you want to watch this slower or faster. And now I'll answer some questions. And the first one comes up from Daniel. I'm following on with the Preflight Profile Digital Basic, which was made by you. Oh, thank you, Daniel. Bring me up from the days of yore when yore was but a lad. Under page and edit and the color, several options you were talking about are not present. How are we turning these on and off? Okay, so when we're in here and we're looking at something like color, these segments over here are ways that we can add in checks or remove checks. So if I wanted to see if color was ICC based, I can double click on it and bring it in, and it's giving me a warning that I'm using ICC based color and the ability to convert it to CMYK, and I can remove it here. So this is the way we add checks to and from the list of checks. All right. Went pretty fast today, but seeing no questions, I'm going to go ahead and give you 10 minutes back, 10 or 15 minutes back in your morning. Don't tell your boss. It's okay. You were on, as far as everybody here, we all agree. Everybody was on the call until 9 a.m. Pacific time. That guy ran almost to the last second. And enjoy a little time to breathe and not have to check your email. I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks so much.